All right, so we have to get into this. Enough's enough. Are y'all trying to bully Caitlin Clark at this point? Y'all are running around acting like a bunch of bullies right now, and it is out of pocket. It's out of line. We have got to get into it. Chelsea Gray, Asia Wilson, Becky Hammond. It sounds like y'all threatening Caitlin Clark at All-Star Weekend. It sounds like a threat. Y'all trying to punk her. Y'all trying to bully. Oh, no, we gonna have us talk.
There are moments in sports that don't just change a game, they change everything. The power structure, the hierarchy, the unspoken rules that veterans spent decades building to protect themselves, all of it can collapse in a single night. And that is exactly what happened. Not slowly, not gradually, in 2 minutes flat. One player didn't just win a basketball game, she detonated the entire foundation that the old guard had been standing on for 30 years. And what followed in the hours after that final buzzer was something the league's PR machine was absolutely not prepared for. This isn't a story about basketball anymore. This is a story about power, jealousy, institutional failure, and a generational shift so violent and so sudden that the people who thought they controlled this sport simply lost their minds trying to stop it. So let's go back to the exact moment everything broke open, because if you weren't watching closely, you missed the real war unfolding in real time. The game was tied. The atmosphere inside that arena was suffocating. You could feel it through the screen, that specific kind of tension where every possession feels like it carries the weight of something much larger than the scoreboard. The opposing coaching staff had spent days engineering a defensive scheme built for one singular purpose: to physically and mentally dismantle her rhythm before she could get going. They studied the film, they drew up the traps, they positioned their best defenders to bump her off her spots at half court, smother her in the pick and roll, and force her into costly turnover situations before she could ever get comfortable. It was a smart plan on paper. Against any other player, it probably works. But what happened next is the reason we're here right now. Instead of retreating, instead of playing it safe, instead of doing what every conventional basketball instinct would tell you to do when you're being physically swarmed and strategically suffocated, she stepped back, all the way back to the deep logo, and then she started shooting. Three-pointers from distances that most players don't even practice from. Full-court passes that split double teams like they weren't there. A rapid-fire sequence of decisions so precise, so cold, so calculated that a championship-caliber defensive roster didn't just fail to stop her, they looked completely helpless trying. 14 points under 2 minutes against a defense specifically designed to neutralize everything she does well. The stadium didn't just cheer, it erupted in the kind of noise that rattles something deep in your chest. The kind of collective human reaction that happens when people are witnessing something they genuinely cannot believe with their own eyes. Every single possession during that run felt like a dagger, not just to the opposing team, to the entire old guard watching from their seats, from their suites, from their coaching benches and front office chairs, because they all understood in that moment what this meant. This wasn't a hot streak, this wasn't luck, this was a cold, systematic dismantling of everything they thought they knew about defensive basketball, executed by someone operating on a plane of reality that the traditional game simply has no answer for. The defense looked frozen, the opposing bench sat in visible panic, and the arena crowd reached a decibel level that hadn't been witnessed in women's basketball in modern memory. It wasn't a close call or a controversial moment, it was a declaration, and every veteran, every legacy coach, every front office executive who saw it happen live knew that the game they spent their careers building had just been rewritten in real time. What happened next in that tunnel is where the story gets truly dark. As the final buzzer echoed across the floor and the broadcast anchors began their standard post-game wrap-up, the real story was already unfolding behind the security doors. The cameras stayed on the court, the highlight packages were being assembled, the social media clips were already going viral before the players had even reached the locker room hallway. But what was happening in that corridor, away from the lights, away from the broadcast crew, away from the carefully managed public-facing version of this league, was something the PR department cannot spin its way out of. Reports emerging from multiple sources inside the arena describe a scene that can only be characterized as a complete breakdown of professional composure. Unverified accounts circulating widely in sports media circles suggest that veteran players, visibly consumed by frustration and unable to process what had just happened to them on live international television, did not walk calmly to their locker rooms and collect themselves like professionals. Instead, according to these reports, the superstar was cornered during the post-game walkout in a narrow hallway, and the message delivered was not congratulatory.
To the black lesbians and Asia Wilson. Wow. Let's get right into it, shall we? Like the video, hype the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below and subscribe to the channel. That would mean so much to me. Before we get into this, folks, what's going on in the WNBA when it comes to fans talking shit, being mean, saying not nice things? It happens in all sports leagues. These women are just so emotional and so soft, they can't handle it. They've been begging for—
The specific exchange that sources describe is alarming on multiple levels. The confrontation was reportedly direct, aggressive, and carried an unmistakable tone of warning rather than competitive frustration. "We need to talk." That's what sources claim was said, and the implication behind those 4 words, delivered in a hostile hallway ambush after getting completely outclassed on a global stage, was not the kind of professional dialogue that league officials would ever want documented. Venue security and stadium personnel reportedly had to intervene immediately to prevent the verbal clash from escalating into something physical. Let that sink in for a moment. Security had to step in at a professional sports event because veterans could not maintain basic composure after losing a basketball game. Now, it is absolutely critical to be clear here. These are unverified reports. Sources close to the situation have described this version of events, and it has circulated rapidly across multiple sports media platforms, but no official confirmation has been issued by the league or the players involved. What we can confirm is the reaction that followed, because that reaction tells you everything you need to know about the culture operating beneath the surface of this league. Here is where the story shifts from a locker room incident into something with genuine institutional consequences. In any healthy professional sports environment, when credible reports emerge of veterans aggressively confronting a younger player in a hallway after a game, the organizational response is immediate and unambiguous. You do not tolerate that behavior. You do not justify it. You do not quietly signal your support for the people doing it. You step in, you de-escalate, and you make it absolutely clear that the culture of your organization does not allow for that kind of targeted intimidation, regardless of who the player is or how many championships they've won. That is not what happened here. Legacy coaching figures, according to reports, did not condemn the confrontation. They reportedly doubled down on it, framing the aggressive pushback as justified, as necessary, as a reasonable response to some unnamed grievance that nobody in the open air of public accountability has been willing to specifically define. And that institutional backing is what transforms an ugly locker room moment into a systemic indictment of the entire power structure. Because what it reveals is that the gatekeepers, the coaches, the veterans, the legacy figures who built their identities around controlling the culture of this sport, genuinely believe they have the right to dictate who gets to dominate, who stays in their lane, and who receives the spotlight based on criteria that have absolutely nothing to do with on-court performance. Think about the message that sends. You can score 14 points in 2 minutes against a championship-caliber defense on a global stage. You can single-handedly rewrite the record books. You can sell out arenas and shatter television ratings and drive merchandise sales to levels this league has never seen before. And the response from the establishment is to corner you in a hallway and issue a warning. Not applause, not acknowledgement, a warning.
That is not a competitive sports culture. That is something much uglier and much more calculated than competitive frustration. What these veterans and legacy coaches appear to be protecting is not the integrity of the game. They are protecting their position within a hierarchy they spent decades constructing. The unspoken rule has always been that you earn your respect by paying dues on the terms that the established stars set. You don't come in and immediately rewrite what the game looks like. You don't arrive and instantly shift the commercial center of gravity of the entire league before the veterans have decided you've earned the right to do that. And when someone violates that unspoken rule, when someone arrives and immediately, undeniably, statistically proves that the old hierarchy is obsolete, the establishment doesn't congratulate them, it tries to bring them back in line. The problem is that this particular player is completely unbringable.
Let's talk about what was happening in the executive suites while all of this was going on. Because the tunnel confrontation was just the visible tip of an iceberg that runs much deeper into the corporate architecture of this league. Emergency administrative discussions were reportedly called late into the night following the incident. High-level meetings between officials scrambling to manage what everyone involved understood was a potentially catastrophic media situation. How do you control the narrative when the narrative is this explosive? How do you spin a story where your most established veterans allegedly cornered your most commercially valuable player in a hallway? You can't, and that's the crisis. Rumors circulating in league circles suggest that discussions extended beyond standard disciplinary review territory into genuinely alarming areas, including conversations about national team rosters and whether the fallout from the All-Star Weekend confrontation might result in consequences for players involved in the incident. These are unverified reports and should be treated as such. But the fact that these rumors are circulating at all, and circulating loudly enough to reach mainstream sports media, tells you something significant about the level of institutional anxiety currently paralyzing the league's front offices. Corporate sponsors are watching this situation with extreme unease. The financial arithmetic of this league has shifted dramatically and permanently over the last 18 months. Every major television network renegotiating broadcast rights is doing so with one name driving the valuation. Every corporate partnership announcement, every arena expansion project, every merchandise licensing deal, the economic gravity of all of it has migrated toward a single generational phenomenon in a way that nobody in the front office has any roadmap for handling. The legacy stars who were supposed to be the commercial faces of this league's next chapter are now financial secondary characters in someone else's story. And the institutional response to that uncomfortable reality has been, astonishingly, to enable a culture of hostility rather than adapt to the new economic reality. The parasitic strategy that was being quietly run in the front offices was always going to fail. The thinking seemed to be that you could leverage her unprecedented popularity to grow the entire brand, elevate the league's overall profile, attract new sponsors and new audiences, collect the financial benefits of her presence, while simultaneously looking the other way when the culture around her became hostile and dangerous. Use the commercial value, tolerate the toxicity, pocket the money, and pretend the environment is fine. That strategy has now officially collapsed under the weight of its own contradiction. You cannot profit off an athlete's unmatched brilliance while actively allowing the institution around her to treat her as a problem to be managed rather than a phenomenon to be celebrated. Eventually, the contradiction becomes impossible to hide, and this All-Star Weekend is the moment the curtain came completely down. Now, here is where the conversation gets genuinely complicated, and it's important to address this honestly rather than letting it get swallowed by the loudest voices on either side. Because the discourse around this league right now has become so thoroughly poisoned by bad faith arguments from multiple directions that almost nobody is actually engaging with the real issues in any meaningful way. Yes, there are genuinely toxic fans in this ecosystem. That is not a controversial statement. In any sport with a massive and rapidly growing fan base, toxic behavior exists. People say cruel things online. People cross lines.
A person losing their job because they directed hate speech at a professional athlete is not a controversial outcome. That is a consequence. Companies are within their rights to protect their brand by terminating employees who behave in ways that are publicly indefensible. That's how accountability in civil society works. But here is the part that the loudest voices in this conversation are actively avoiding. The behavior of toxic fans does not belong exclusively to one side of this cultural divide. And the selective framing of the entire online hate conversation, the way it gets deployed specifically and almost exclusively to paint one particular fan base as uniquely racist and uniquely dangerous, is a manipulation that a growing number of people can see through clearly. When Alicia Collier was dominating the MVP race last season before her injury, reports suggest that segments of social media were targeting her with genuinely racist language, not for anything she did on the court, but for who she was in her personal life. That is reprehensible. It is also not something that got the same volume of institutional condemnation that gets applied to other situations. The standard for what constitutes unacceptable behavior seems to shift depending on who the target is, and that inconsistency is corrosive because it makes it impossible to have an honest conversation about where the real toxicity is coming from.
The veteran players calling for a collective conversation about fan behavior at All-Star Weekend are not wrong to want that conversation. Fan behavior in professional sports is a legitimate issue worth addressing institutionally. But the credibility of that conversation requires consistency. It requires acknowledging hateful behavior directed at players exists across multiple dimensions and cannot be selectively condemned based on which player is receiving it. And critically, if you're going to call for accountability from fans, you cannot simultaneously avoid calling for accountability from within your own locker room. You don't get to demand that the league police online comments while reports are circulating that veterans are physically cornering players in hallways. Both things need to be addressed. Picking only the one that's convenient is not advocacy, it's deflection. Reports indicate that beyond the tunnel incident, there were active discussions among veteran players about using the All-Star Weekend as the setting for a more formal, organized confrontation. A planned meeting where multiple established stars intended to collectively pressure her into making a public statement condemning her own fan base. Let that framing land for a moment, because it is extraordinary when you examine it clearly. The ask, according to reports that have been circulating in media circles, was not a conversation among equals exploring a complex situation. The ask was a demand. Deliver a specific public statement on our terms, addressing grievances we define, or face collective social and professional pressure from the most powerful established names in the league. She has already spoken, publicly, repeatedly. During her rookie season, before the commercial stakes were what they are now, she used her platform to speak up for her teammates. She advocated for better pay. She addressed specific incidents involving players who were being targeted. She did all of this before the league fully understood what she was going to become commercially, and before the veteran establishment had fully processed what her arrival meant for the existing hierarchy. The receipts are public. The record is clear. Demanding that she do it again, on demand, at the schedule and terms dictated by the veterans who reportedly just had security step in during a hallway confrontation, that is not a conversation, that is a flex. And it is the kind of institutional power move that only makes sense if you genuinely believe you still have the leverage to make it work. Here is the problem with that belief. The leverage has already shifted. When you are dependent on one player's commercial pull to justify the broadcast rights your league is currently negotiating, when her name is what fills arenas and drives subscription numbers and makes corporate sponsors return calls, you do not have leverage over her. She has leverage over you.
and using that leverage to demand public performances from someone who has already been more publicly supportive than the situation required is not a power move, it is a miscalculation of genuinely historic proportions. Let's be specific about the double standard that has been corroding institutional credibility for the better part of 2 years now, because specifics matter when the broad strokes are being used to support conclusions that don't survive contact with the actual record. The physical play on the court during her rookie season produced some of the most widely documented incidents of targeted aggressive contact in recent professional sports memory. Hits to the head, deliberate contact away from the ball, plays that would have generated immediate flagrant fouls if the situations were reversed. All of it was captured on camera. All of it went viral, and a significant portion of it generated zero official league response in real time. When the same referees who call technical fouls on players for mild verbal reactions to calls consistently failed to flag objectively dangerous contact specifically directed at one player, people noticed. When the pattern repeated across multiple games, multiple arenas, multiple officiating crews, people noticed that too. The mainstream sports media spent months constructing elaborate justifications for why each individual incident was actually fine. Competitive play, physical basketball, standard rookie initiation. But the cumulative pattern tells a story that the individual explanations cannot account for. A pattern of dangerous contact, a pattern of non-response from officials, and a pattern of institutional silence from the very league office that claims to prioritize player safety above everything else. The fans who are furious about this are not furious because they don't understand basketball. They are furious because they understand it well enough to know what they're watching. And they are furious because the institutional response to what they're watching has been, consistently, to tell them that what they see with their own eyes isn't what's actually happening. That kind of condescension toward a fan base that has driven unprecedented growth in this league is not just strategically foolish, it's the kind of institutional arrogance that tends to accelerate rather than resolve crises.
The referees, the executives, the legacy coaches, the veteran player coalition, they are all operating on the same foundational assumption that the traditional power structure of this sport gives them the authority to define reality for everyone watching. And that assumption is being demolished in real time by economic data, by television ratings, by attendance figures, and by the kind of raw, unfiltered fan engagement that no corporate PR strategy has ever been able to manufacture artificially. Here is the uncomfortable truth that no one inside the front office wants to say out loud. This league's recent commercial renaissance is not the result of a successful institutional strategy. It is the result of one person showing up. The broadcast deals that are being renegotiated right now at values that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago, those numbers exist because of one name on the marquee. The arena expansions, the new markets being courted, the corporate sponsors who were previously indifferent to women's basketball suddenly flooding back with 8- and 9-figure partnership proposals, all of it traces back to a single generational arrival that the league did not plan for and has not known how to properly respond to. This creates an almost paradoxical institutional situation. The very phenomenon that is saving the league financially is the same phenomenon that has destabilized the internal culture so completely that veteran players are reportedly conducting hallway confrontations and emergency all-star weekend meetings. The money being generated by her presence is the money funding the salaries and the platform of the very establishment figures who appear to be most invested in minimizing her. The sponsors whose names are on the arena scoreboards are there because of the television ratings she generates, and those same sponsors are now quietly watching to see whether the institutional response to this all-star weekend crisis is one that justifies continued investment. Corporate America is not sentimental about these decisions. Sponsors do not write 8-figure checks to be associated with institutional chaos and publicly documented double standards.
The league's commercial credibility right now rests on one thing: whether it can demonstrate that it is capable of managing this moment with professionalism, consistency, and a basic commitment to treating its most commercially valuable and most publicly visible player with the same institutional support it claims to provide for everyone else. If it cannot do that, if the pattern of hallway confrontations and selective officiating and leadership silence continues, the sponsors who are currently at the table will eventually make different decisions, and the television networks renegotiating broadcast rights will factor in this institutional instability into their valuation models. The old guard does not appear to understand that this leverage calculation has already been made above their pay grade. The executives know what the numbers say, the network producers know what drives ratings, and what all of them know, what the data makes undeniably clear, is that the future commercial viability of this league is not attached to the legacy stars who built it through years of hard work and genuine sacrifice. It is attached to the name currently printed on every sold-out ticket and every record-breaking broadcast agreement. That is a brutal reality for the veterans who deserve better than to have their legacies overshadowed, but it is the reality, and building a hostile internal culture to fight against it is not going to change the numbers. Here is where we have to land, because all of the drama and all of the tunnel reports and all of the emergency meetings ultimately come down to a single question that the WNBA as an institution has been avoiding answering with any clarity. Is this league going to adapt to the new reality or continue fighting it? Because the fighting is not working. Every aggressive confrontation, every selective officiating pattern, every public statement that attempts to reframe her fan base as uniquely toxic while ignoring behavior within the league's own community, none of it has slowed the commercial, cultural, and statistical dominance that has completely redrawn the landscape of women's professional basketball. The old guard has thrown everything at this situation. They have tried physical intimidation on the court, they have tried social pressure through player coalitions, they have tried media narratives designed to associate her popularity with racism rather than talent, they have tried institutional silence from the league office. None of it has worked. The ratings keep going up, the arenas keep selling out, the merchandise keeps flying off the shelves, and the historical record of what is happening right now keeps writing itself in ink that cannot be erased.
History does not negotiate with the people who try to stop it. It does not ask permission from veterans who feel threatened by it. It does not slow down because a coaching legend is uncomfortable with how fast the landscape is shifting. 14 points in 2 minutes against a championship defense on a global stage is not a moment that the old guard gets to recontextualize or minimize or explain away. It happened. Everyone saw it. The cameras captured it permanently. And every person who was in that arena, every person who watched the broadcast, every person who saw the clips explode across social media in the hours that followed, they all know what they witnessed. The crown does not get handed back because the previous holders demand it. It gets taken by the person whose performance makes every previous claim to dominance look insufficient by comparison. And what we watched during those 2 minutes, what we are watching across this entire season, across every record being shattered, and every broadcast milestone being crossed, and every new commercial partnership being announced, is a changing of the guard so complete and so irreversible that the only real question left is whether the institution built on their legacy will be strong enough to survive the transition. What is your take on what went down this All-Star weekend? Was this the final breaking point for the league's toxic internal culture, or is there still a path where the establishment figures out how to coexist with a player who has already left their entire hierarchy behind? Drop everything you are thinking in the comments right now. This is the conversation the sports world needs to be having. Hit that like button, subscribe with all notifications on, and share this with every fan who knows exactly what they watched and refuses to be told it didn't happen.